Hi everyone, welcome to my third video. This time I decided to talk to you about languages. I have been receiving a lot of requests, questions from you during this period, so not just in the past few weeks but even before, of how many languages I speak, which were the methods that I used while learning, and so today I decided to cover this topic with you as I think it's very interesting, it's very important, it's not very adapted to any age, so it can be useful to all of you no matter the age or gender of that you are. I have been living in Italy for 8 years now, and during this period I have been in contact with so many different nationalities. I have had so many friends from different parts of the world. I have lived with many different girls, and I can say that being in contact with different languages has become a part of my daily life. This is very important for me, and I think that would be very important for anyone, especially because languages are a part of knowledge that I would say are not very straightforward. I think knowing as many languages as possible develops your brain in ways that you cannot even imagine, because for example I know that the more languages I was learning, the more faster I was thinking, the more I was actually learning easily other stuff during my university and my studies. And so to start from the beginning, I actually started learning English at first, and this was in my first grade when I was 7 years old. That was actually the decision of my parents. At that point I was very small, I didn't even know what it meant to know different languages. Of course I was in contact with English on a daily basis through TV, music, books and cartoons and everything, but it was something that for me was actually just so straightforward. It was something that was taken for granted. Of course, knowing the language on more different levels doesn't mean just for you to watch TV. It means for you to actually sit down and study. I started first with English when I was 7, and besides having it in school, I was going to private lessons twice or 3 times per week depending on the age. And actually I started at age 7, as I mentioned. However, I never stopped until I was 19, actually, until I started studying here at Bocconi. I have to say that it was very easy for me to actually study in that language. It was much easier actually than in Serbian, because I was so used to that. Learning English was always a very interesting thing for me because of the travels, because of everywhere I've been, because of the importance of the language itself. Besides just studying for daily purposes, I always strive for more, and in those schools we always had to learn for those, let's say, official certificates. So that was also a very lucky thing for me, because it actually provided me with the possibility to learn more and to learn English in a more official way. This was also important later for Bocconi, because there, even though I studied in English, there was some kind of university policy that we had to have, because we are international, so we all had to have an official certificate. So besides having an FCE and advanced certificate from Cambridge, I also had to have IELTS, which I actually did for 3 times. I don't know how many of you know, but IELTS is valid just for 2 years. During my life in Serbia, when I was actually smaller, I used to travel a lot with my parents, and the country that we visited the most was actually Italy, and that was one of the reasons why I actually wanted to come here and to live here for a while. That a while became a bit more after, but that's besides the point. Anyways, my dad, when I was 12, told me, okay Natasha, maybe you should learn another language, and maybe that should be Italian. I was still small at that point, but for me it seemed kind of interesting, especially because Italian is really a wonderful language, and it really, for me sometimes it seems like as if you were singing while you're speaking. So I said, yeah, definitely I should do that. I was still small at that point, so I actually started doing something that I was not sure I was ready for. So when I started it, I actually realized how much I don't know actually anything. So for me, it was a very big shock because in English, I was actually supposed to say anything because I was also in contact with TV, music, books, and as I mentioned before. But with Italian, I was not much in contact except when I was traveling there. So for me, it was a big shock and I was so confused. And while studying, I was actually confusing it a lot with Spanish. So it was really hard for me to even try to do it. So for 2 years, while I was having private lessons with my teacher, I was actually really limited in saying anything. I was so shocked and scared, and for the first 2 years I didn't manage to tell much. But then after a while, after 2 years, it actually kind of just exploded out of me, and I was able to even write, to tell stories, and I was really happy and proud at that point. During my studies at Bocconi, there were a lot of people coming from France. There were a lot of people that were actually international but went to French school, so they spoke French between themselves, and there were a lot of times when I felt kind of left out, and I didn't like the feeling because that's not in my nature to feel left out and do nothing. So in my second year of Bocconi, I came home for summer holidays and I told myself, okay, now you're gonna start learning French. And everyone was like, yeah, you're totally crazy because that language is super hard. And I was like, yeah, I really don't care. I just wanted to start learning it, and then with time I would speak with my friends, even a little bit. Because for me, I'm never ashamed to even try speaking, even though I know I'm making a lot of mistakes and I'm really like doing nothing. So I was like, yeah, definitely that was my choice and I was gonna do that. I found a very great teacher in Serbia, and we were actually having lessons every day. And to be honest to you, French was actually much easier for me than when I was studying Italian. And that is for sure because I was already speaking Italian quite good and the grammar is quite similar. So it was definitely that for me it was much more, like, let's say, straightforward to learn French. French was hard for me just regarding the writings and the pronunciation, but regarding the grammar, I was actually quite fine. Even now, when I actually kind of stopped reading on it and speaking on a more often basis, I can still manage to understand and talk with people, of course, on a more basic level. And besides French, I don't know how many of you know, people in Serbia actually quite understand a lot Spanish because of the TV shows that are being shown. So Spanish for me was always kind of a bit easier, but there was this period when I was actually going to work and live in Barcelona. That was an amazing period. It was not very long, it was short, it was 6-7 months. But before that, I actually took lessons and prepared myself for my periods that I was supposed to stay there. So let's say that Spanish is also a part of my curriculum, especially because in my company where I used to work, people spoke English, of course. However, on a daily basis, it was much easier for us to communicate in English, to communicate in Spanish. So, and it was much better for me too, because then in that way I was practicing a lot, and I was really happy about that because it was another thing for me to learn. And as I mentioned before, for French, it was also the same case as with French. So the Spanish language for me was much easier to learn because I already knew Italian. I was actually confusing a couple of words, and sometimes I was getting a bit confused and all, but definitely learning grammar and that part of the language was much easier for me. What I wanted to tell you today is a couple of tips of how to be very productive when studying languages. I had a couple of tricks that I learned during all this time, given that I have a bit of experience in these kind of studies. My very honest advice would be to read a lot, would be to try to speak whenever you have the opportunity, even though if you're not sure whether you're using the grammar well, whether you're using the words that are actually suitable for the sentence. My advice would be to listen a lot of music, and while listening I would advise you to take the text and try to translate. One of the best advice I would give you is to read a lot of books. While I was studying English, when the language was the most interesting to me was when I was 12, 13. And at that point, I was a very big fan of Harry Potter books. So instead of waiting for the Serbian translators to actually publish the one in Serbian, I always went to buy the newest edition to the bookstore in English. That was not easy at a time because all of those books actually had 700-800 pages. They were full of very unknown words, but for me it was kind of a challenge because I actually didn't care if I didn't understand everything. And then through the book, if a word or a sentence or a phrase were actually repeating a lot, then through the whole sense I would get the meaning, and that was kind of like conquering something new to me, and I really loved the feeling. So my advice is, like, whenever you're studying a new language, just try reading whatever you like. I mean, you don't have to read something very hard or something very that actually makes you feel that actually makes you think a lot about that very particular thing. But try reading maybe magazines or like very light books, and trust me that with time, like, the more you do it, the more you will become familiar with the language, and the more easy you will understand. That was the thing that I was doing with English. When I was studying Italian, it was a bit different, because with Italian, when I tried to do that, I actually felt like my brain wasn't actually receiving the same information as it used to when I was doing it with English. So what I did, it was something a bit different that I mentioned. You should listen a lot of music. What I did is, like, I found the song that I really loved, I found the lyrics online, and then I sat with the lyrics and tried to translate every single word, writing on a paper and writing the translation. That was very interesting, because then you understand also the meaning of the song in a very different way. And trust me, in that way, when you want to think of a word, you think of that song, and then somehow, like, the word comes easily to your mind. And that's very different. That was one way that I was actually studying Italian. The other way was that I was reading a lot of magazines. I was a bit older than when I was studying English, so I was more interested into fashion, into everything like that girls start to like when they enter puberty. So I started reading a lot of light magazines like Glamour or Elle. Vogue was also okay, but in Vogue you don't have many texts. So whenever I was reading, I was learning a lot of everyday life words that you actually use during the day, during your friends hangout. So that was a very useful thing for me, because usually those kind of words you don't find in textbooks. Those are the ones that actually are the most useful to you. The third way that I was studying Italian was turning on my favorite TV show, watching it in the original language, which was usually English, and then putting the subtitle translation in the language I would want to learn. This was the case with Italian and with French also, because Italian, at some point I could even listen and understand, and in that way learn. However, French was always hard for me because of the pronunciation, and I would literally just look at a screen, listen, and not understand a single word because of the pronunciation. So the best way was to actually put the show. I remember I was actually watching a lot of Friends episodes, because that is a show that I can watch all the time. And while I was watching, I put the translation into the French language, and it was much easier for me, and I learned so many words thanks to that method. And it actually not just even words, because there are some part of grammar of French that are not so easy, and that was also the way to learn when to use a certain tense, how to use it, and which was the best way. Regarding the Spanish language, that one I found the easiest one actually to learn, maybe because I was used to watching a lot of TV when I was small, and actually we all love to listen Spanish music and just, I don't know, think of Enrique Iglesias or Juanes or whatever song that you like in Spanish, and of course it's much easier for you to learn the language when you are in the contact with it even before. I had a couple of lessons, as I mentioned, before going to Barcelona, but for me it was a bit different because I was in the contact with a lot of Spanish persons in there. They don't speak a lot of English, so for me it was either you speak or you don't. So I just decided to speak. I try whenever I can to turn on some interesting movie or read something. But as I mentioned, those are the best methods that you could actually use when learning a language, and I always turn to them whenever I feel that I'm actually getting away from the speaking mood, and that is the best way to do it. There was this period that I didn't have much thing to do. That was actually between my internship in Barcelona and my master's, the beginning of my master's studies. I finished studying for the GMAT and I got accepted to come back to Bocconi, so I had a couple of months free. Usually a person would think like, okay, I'm just gonna chill for 3 months and do nothing. However, I wanted to do something very useful, so what I did, I got subscribed into this course of fast learning lessons for the Russian language. I think Russian language is very, very important, especially if you want to work in a luxury industry like I do, especially if you want to learn any of the languages that are actually, let's say, more exotic. For me, of course, it's much easier to learn Russian than Arabic or Chinese, because given that I come from Serbia, we already have almost the same alphabet. So for me, it was like, yeah, I will definitely try to learn something new. I have to be honest to you that learning this language was everything but easy for me. And I know this sounds weird, but I'm gonna tell you why. When studying a foreign language, I was actually very used to learn Latin languages, because they all have very similar grammar. They all belong to the same mother language. So when learning French and Spanish after the Italian, it was much more straightforward. When I started learning Russian, it was a bit of shock for me. Of course, Russian is very similar to Serbian. However, Serbian for me is just something that I know. Of course, I didn't learn all the forms of names in a different way, because like that's a language that I just speak because it's my mother tongue. So when I was supposed to learn that in Russian, and they have 6 cases of names, 6 forms, and I was like, yeah, this is like very too much and very weird for me. It was a bit hard. But I also think it was the case because I was actually having 2 months of lessons every day for 4 hours. So it was really, really, really annoying after a while, because I had an impression that I was learning a lot, but at the end not learning anything. Now when I think about it, I still remember some of the rules, some of the grammar things, and I'm actually happy about that, because if I ever decide to start doing it again, it will be much easier for me. Of course, now I don't think I would be able to communicate with someone in that language on a more fluent basis. I think it would be really, really hard. However, I think at some point I would want to restart the lessons again, because as I said, Russian is a very important language to learn. My advice would be for you to also, if you have a wish or the opportunity, to also do it, because I think it would pay off. I really hope you found this video useful and that I gave you a little bit of encouragement and motivation to start learning a new language or continue learning the one that you maybe stopped or have a difficulty to continue. That languages are really important for us for many reasons, and they open you so many doors and possibilities. And without languages today, I think that you would live very, very slow and that you wouldn't have all the possibilities that they are offering. So I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, any help in something, just write me, comment here below, or find me on Instagram, and I will be happy to help you or give you some more advice if you have some need. So I wish you a great evening and see you soon. Bye!